Hello, welcome to my accounting channel. In this video, I'm going to go over the test review for financial accounting test number 3. So let me share the screen. In your class on Canvas, please go to modules and scroll down to module for test or exam number 3. So usually our third test covers chapter 7, 8, and 9. Chapter 7 on receivables, 8 on long-term assets, and 9 on current liabilities. In this folder, I will place this video, the link to this video, and also you can see this link to a PowerPoint file for the test review. I'm going to go over these files these slides right now. So, as always, the format of the third test will be very similar to tests 1 and test 2. So let me upload it this way. Let's open it right here. Okay, so the test will be open for 2 days. Here we go. It will be open from Sunday 12:01 a.m. until Monday 11:55 p.m. I usually send you email notifications and you cannot make up the test once it closes. So since you have 3 hours to complete the test, you need to access it by 8:55 p.m. At the latest. You have to complete the test once it's started. You cannot save and exit. It does include 5 extra points for the total of 155 points, and the points are just built in. So as I mentioned before, the test covers chapters 7, 8, and 9, and it has a mixture of multiple choice questions, 30 multiple choice questions with 10 questions per chapter, and each multiple choice is worth 2 points multiplied by 30 questions gives you 60 points, and then the rest of it, so 155 minus 60 gives us 95 points, go into 10 problems, which is similar to homework problems that you complete, especially the few of the first ones in your homework, but you cannot use check my work option or hints. So let's move on here. These are all of the same formats and requirements as you had before in your tests. You cannot print a copy. If you get locked out, email me so I can reset the test for you. Each student has a different set of multiple choice questions and problems, and the numbers are generated algorithmically. Once you complete your test, you can see your points out of 150 right away on in Connect. But after the due date, you can also click on the link to the same test, go back to Connect, and view your answers as well as correct answers. And if you're disagreeing with something or not understanding something with what you missed, please come to my office hours or email me with specific questions. So these are the problems to expect. And again, I want to mention that about 2/3 of your points, 95 points, come from the problems. So for the problems in chapter 7, you will have 3 problems. You will have to estimate bad debt using allowance methods, percentage of sales and percent of receivables. We talked about the direct write-off method. I'm not going to ask you to journalize entries using the direct write-off. Instead, you will do percentage of sales, calculate the percent, plug it in, or percent of receivables, calculate the percent. That's not your adjustment. That is the desirable balance of the allowance for doubtful accounts account. In both methods, you're going to debit BDE, you're going to debit bad debt expense, and you're going to credit ADA, allowance for doubtful accounts, which is a contra asset. But again, percent of sales, you simply calculate and plug that amount into your adjusting entry. For percent of receivables, you need to perform an extra step. You will have to complete the problem on aging of receivables that we did with you in homework and in class. And then you will have to journalize 3 transactions related to notes receivables when you're accepting a note, when you make an adjustment for accrued interest revenue, and then when you are getting paid the at maturity. So 3 types of entries. That's chapter 7. In chapter 8, there was a lot of stuff, but I'm only going to ask you to do the lump sum purchases of assets when you are purchasing 2 or more long-term assets with one transaction, and you have to allocate the amount of money you spent to each asset. You will have to use 3 types of depreciation methods and show me how to calculate depreciation per year. And it's the straight line depreciation, units of production, and double declining balance. A lot of points come from this problem, lots of points. And then partial year depreciation. What happens when you change estimates, when you change your salvage value, or when you change the number of years, and how do you dispose of assets? So lots of important concepts here. In chapter 9, I'm only going to ask you to do payroll, and you will have to do a journal entry for the employees payroll, and the journal entry for the employer. And also, I will ask you to do 2 journal transactions related to warranty. I'm not going to ask you to calculate all ratios from the end of all 3 chapters, but 1 or 2 of them is a fair chance. So this is the review of your problems. And now you can see key terms for chapter 7. We talked about accounts receivable versus notes receivable. We talked about AR as a controlling account, and it has an additional subsidiary accounts receivable ledger. We talked about credit card sales very little. And we mentioned compare direct write-off method, which is not allowed by GAAP but used for taxation purposes, versus allowance method. And under allowance, you can do percent of sales, percent of receivables, or aging of receivables. We introduced a new contra asset account called ADA, or the allowance for doubtful accounts. You calculated net realizable value, or you can just call it net AR. And we talked about notes receivables, how to calculate the maturity date, how to calculate simple interest, and we also talked about factoring, pledging of receivables, and this is the ratio called AR turnover. So if something is unclear, make sure to study it, make sure to ask your tutor questions. You can also ask me questions, but these are the key terms we covered in chapter 7. In chapter 8, we talked about long-term assets. We identified 3 groups. The first group was called planned assets, or PPE, plant property and equipment. And then we talked about with you about natural assets. I did not include them here. And then, guys, the third group was intangible assets. Natural resources and intangible assets. Now, under plant assets, we talked about lump sum purchases, differences between depreciation versus depletion versus amortization. What is the formula for book value, which is cost minus the accumulated depreciation. And you need to understand that accumulated depreciation increases, of course, every period, and the book value goes down every period, and at the end of the asset's life, the book value is equal to salvage value. We talked about accumulated depreciation, which is a contra asset and goes on the balance sheet, versus depreciation expense. Of course, it's an expense account, and you will find it on the income statement. We compared straight line depreciation with the UOP depreciation with the DDB depreciation. And as I mentioned, you need to use all 3 methods to calculate depreciation and understand the differences between them. We talked about changes in estimates, markers, which is the calculating depreciation for taxation purposes, partial year depreciation, and also recording the disposal of plant assets. It could get confusing, so please look it over how you can have a gain or a loss on the disposal of a plant asset. We compared and contrasted revenue expenses with capital expenditures. So your regular expenses versus extraordinary, ordinary and extraordinary. expenses or expenditures. And with intangible assets, we did not spend much time on them, so there are no separate problems on intangibles, but you might have a multiple choice. Make sure you know the types and make sure you know how to test for impairment. And what is impairment? We talked about impairment of goodwill. And your one ratio in this chapter was total asset turnover. The last chapter that is covered on this exam is chapter 9 for current liabilities. I listed different types of current liabilities. You distinguish between known, estimated, and contingent liabilities. And make sure you understand the three factors that are either known or could be estimated. We talked about unearned revenues, and then we spent a lot of time on payroll. We compared and defined gross pay versus net pay. We talked about FICA taxes, and these include the Social Security tax and Medicare tax. We talked about unemployment taxes, the FUTA and SUTA, the Federal Unemployment Tax Act and the State Unemployment Tax Act. We made two large journal entries, one for the employees portion of the payroll and another one for the employers. Make sure you understand those entries, they will be on the test. And also, very briefly, I gave examples of estimated liabilities. We mostly focused on warranty, not much on benefits of vacation. And we also talked about a legal suit as an example of a contingent liability. So that pretty much concludes my review for test 3. I hope you do well and you find this video useful. Thank you.